privilege to have you here today.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for coming to listen to me. I'll just give you a tiny little bit of background about myself. As you know, my name is Sharon McIvor. I'm a member of the Inuktitut Nation in south central British Columbia, little community outside of Merritt, about 3 hours northeast of here, but 2.5 the way that I drive. So I can get home in about 2.5 hours, barring bad traffic. And I was born there. I was born in my territory. I drive to work up to the Nicoll Valley Institute of Technology every day, and I drive by the spot where I was born. It was a little house by the river. The house is no longer there, but the spot is about 50 yards. I drive from where I drive every day. My parents, my grandparents, and as far back as we know, were born in the territory, as were my children and most of my grandchildren. I've had one grandchild born about an hour and a half away in Okanagan territory, not in Thompson territory, or in the Inuktitut territory, and not in Inuktitut territory. So my roots are long and deep. I've never left the valley to live elsewhere. I've gone out of the valley to mainly for educational purposes, and there were some years where I maintained an apartment elsewhere, but I've always had my home in Merritt, and I've always lived there. That's always where I consider home. And in fact, that if I'm gone for any length of time, I get homesick. I actually have to go back home because I start to pine for my community, pine for my territory. So today I was been invited to talk about McIvor, and of course, you know, in our tradition, it's not a good thing to talk about yourself, because if you do, especially the early teachings tell you, if you do, especially if you brag about yourself or you talk about your good attributes, you put those in jeopardy, because if you don't give the respect from where they came from, in fact, they're gifts that are given to you, and you don't acknowledge that, then the gift can be very, very quickly taken away. So I have a hard time talking about me, about myself and my accomplishments. But I will tell you a little bit about the case, because although the case carries my name, I'm not the only person involved with it. We had a huge amount of help. And I have to start off acknowledging those who came before me. I have many women, many of them unnamed because they've had their part but haven't left their names behind. Those who have left their names behind are a woman by the name of Mary Tuax-Early, a Ganawagi woman who was one of the first to come forward and say, you know, discrimination based on sex in Indian status is not right, and it's against our tradition, and we should do something about it. A woman by the name of Nellie Carlson, a woman out of Alberta, the same thing. Nellie was a member of the, original member of the Saddle Lake First Nation, and would proudly in 1985 regained her right to recognition. Unfortunately, her community would not take her back, and I understand that she passed without having that come full circle and go home again. And I believe there was also an issue around burial about her. So, there is Jeanette Corbière-Laval. Many of you who have looked at equality rights cases, especially Aboriginal equality rights cases, will have come across Jeanette Corbière-Laval. And she was one of the first to take a case, along with Yvonne Bedard, took a case to challenge that section of the Indian Act that discriminated against women. And Sandra Lovelace, who is now Sandra Lovelace Nicholas, Senator Sandra Lovelace Nicholas, took the case of the discrimination against Aboriginal women to the United Nations, and has successful conclusion there. The United Nations did tell Canada that that was discrimination based actually was discrimination. It wasn't discrimination based on sex, which was something that they weren't able to do because at the time they hadn't signed on to the proper convention. They did say that they deprived Lovelace from her right to her community and her culture and her language, because when she lost her Indian status, she was no longer able to reside on her reserve, the reserve where she was born and the reserve where she grew up. She couldn't go back. Unbeknownst to her, when she married, her and her husband moved elsewhere, and when their marriage broke down and she tried to go home, she couldn't, because they said when she married her non-Aboriginal husband, she lost her right to recognition, and along with that right to recognition was the right to live on her reserve in her community. So the United Nations said that that was contrary to the convention that Canada had signed on to. So it's important to me to acknowledge that, you know, my little contribution is very small in comparison to the long line of women and supporters that have moved this issue and tried to set something that was very, very wrong back right again. Unfortunately, we haven't quite got there yet, so I'm looking for those behind me that will help with this, because I suspect that I'll be gone as well before we can get this issue properly resolved. I also have to acknowledge the many women and supporters that have supported the case in many ways. Law students from this campus that have done law research for the case and spent many hours putting together things that we needed. We also have legal team, my good friend Gwen Brodsky and Sheila Day, who have made a lot of contributions around making phone calls, doing research. Sheila's excellent at getting things out in the media, and when we're all busy with our heads down trying to do something, she's very good about making sure that those in the media that need to know at least get notified, and we get some kind of advertising or voice out there. Rob Grant, who came to us, we're equality rights specialists. Rob is a guy that knows how the court system works and knows which buttons to push to get things happening. And Rob was very, very good at that. And we ended up being able to get into court a lot earlier because of Rob's interventions. And I can't go without acknowledging the hundreds of people that supported us financially. Because to take a case to the Supreme Court of Canada, you would be foolish to go with less than $250,000. Court Challenges program was canceled right in the middle of what was going on, but I did get money from the Court Challenges program, and I'm really grateful for the money from the Court Challenges program, although myself and Sheila and others were instrumental in having the Court Challenges program put into place initially. And so we did get money for that, but there are unions across the country that also donated money. Little communities across the country that get a check for $150 went down to the meeting in the downtown east side, and these are women, mainly indigenous women that are living from hand to mouth in accommodation that probably animals shouldn't be living in. But they made a little donation at a meeting, and I know for them it was a huge sacrifice, because it meant that they probably wouldn't be able to eat properly until the next check came, or probably walked instead of bused or that kind of thing. So the sacrifice was huge for them, and I wanted to acknowledge that that kind of sacrifice that those women made, because they saw it was an important issue. And lastly, the number of powwows that I went to where they did what they call the blanket dance. And if those of you who've been to powwows, you know that the drums beat and they go around with the blanket and people throw money into the blanket. And so then at the end of the day, you count up the money and you put it in your pocket and go into pause.